Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Well, we're joined now from our studio here in London by the Business Secretary, Sajid Javid. Sajid Javid, let's just first of all deal with the broken promises. Basically, the three key targets: no deficit by 2015. Well, that's out. Borrowing was to go down every single year. Well, it's gone up now by 31 billion. The welfare cap wants to be broken every year. Doesn't look too good, does it, when trust is the essence of this whole business?
Well, I think the first thing I'd point out is that these forecasts, the very ones that you're using, you talked about earlier in the programme, are from the OBR. And the OBR is independent. I mean, the days where a chancellor set his forecast to fit around the plans, those are long gone. And I think that's why we can take these forecasts a lot more seriously. They take into account all sorts of events and factors. And one thing that the OBR wouldn't ignore is what the IMF, the OECD and others have said in the last few months, is for lots of reasons, dark clouds in the global economy. They have downgraded global growth, and as a result, we are one of the most open economies in the world. Of course, it's going to have an impact.
But it's your welfare cap, not theirs, not the OBR's welfare cap. But you break it every year.
Well, growth forecasts do have an impact. Even a small change can have a big impact. Inflation, again, government doesn't control that, can have an impact. But the important thing is this: even with the downgrade that the OBR announced today, because it's their numbers, we are still growing, according to the IMF, the OECD, we're the fastest growing advanced economy in the world this year. We will be the fastest growing economy, according to their forecasts, in the G7 next year. And that's because we're not complacent. And what you've seen from the Chancellor today is that we'll stick to a plan that keeps delivering for this country.
But you see, in fact, the greatest threat to the British economy is actually our own productivity, which is very low. What do you put that down to? Is it something to do with the bankers in London or what? Why is productivity going down so
Well, actually,
fast?
John, you're absolutely right to highlight productivity. It's a long-running problem.
But you're the business secretary. It's your job to be right.
And that's why one of the first things that I did when I became business secretary, I think within 3 weeks, was to publish for the first time ever for this country a productivity plan that goes through 15 things that we need to do that are going to take years. We're not going to turn it around overnight. There's no silver bullet that turns around productivity, but it is a real challenge.
But what do you ascribe it? What's your analysis as the business secretary?
There's no easy answer, but there are a number of factors. I think that we have not, as a country, invested properly in infrastructure over decades. We've seen a change. We've got the biggest infrastructure investment plans of any government. Skills is a problem. I rang this A today, because it's National Apprenticeship Week. We need more apprentices in this country, having the kind of skills that we want to see.
Great, but
and all these things come together to change productivity, but also some of the things the Chancellor did today. The tax cuts for businesses, as well as working people, the tax cuts for businesses, hugely important. The biggest tax cut we've seen in business rates ever. You know, no budget has had a £7 billion cut in business rates. All this is going to make a difference, but it will take time. I don't think anyone expects productivity can be turned around overnight.
Well, we might understand all of that, but what we don't understand is why we have to keep borrowing. And, you know, these figures swill about. Last year, you found £27 billion down the sofa. This year, you're £51 billion adrift.
Well,
I mean, what's going on?
The reason we need to keep borrowing, if we cast our minds back to 2010, this country had the largest budget deficit of any industrialised economy. It was 10% of our GDP. It's come down now to around 3% of our GDP. That's a two-thirds
But the autumn statement was but 4 months ago. And in that time, we've gone from plus 27 to minus 55. And if that was all, there's a billion sign on the bottom of each.
Well, as I said, GDP forecast changed, not our forecast. That has an impact. But the important thing is this. The Chancellor has said by the end of this Parliament, we will have a surplus. We will be living within our means. We will be saving for the future. This will make the economy more secure, which is what we want. We want the confidence that then creates jobs. We have the jobs numbers published today. More people employed than at any time in our history. 2.3 million jobs created since 2010. That's what I want to see continue, and it requires what we've heard from the Chancellor today.
Every objective analyst says of Britain that the widening gap between rich and poor is the critical issue, that it's getting worse and worse. And what is worse today than to hear of tax cuts for the middle classes whilst disabled people suffer cuts in their benefits?
Well, actually, let's talk about the tax cuts, and then we'll talk about the benefits, the disabled benefits. The tax cuts, the biggest tax cut the Chancellor announced today was for working people when we're increasing the tax-free personal allowance from £11,000 to £11,500.
But I was talking about fairness.
But it's fair that we cut taxes for the lowest paid. That's what that allowance will do. It's also fair, by the way, that we introduced the new national living wage, which will help those low workers. You also mentioned the disability benefits. You know, I want to live in a society that we look after the most vulnerable and we give them what they need. And that's why I wouldn't accept it if disability benefits were actually falling. And the reality is they've actually been rising. Since 2010, they're up £3 billion in real terms. Over the lifetime of this Parliament, they're actually going up by £1 billion, and that's because we're focusing those benefits on those people that need them the most. And surely that's right.
I don't need to tell you, but the backdrop to this whole business today is the referendum. Is the referendum...
What referendum?
The referendum on Europe, in which you are most entangled. You would never have joined Europe. You wouldn't want to be in it now, but you don't want to leave because you think it's too risky. Well, that's an extraordinarily conflicted situation. And isn't it a situation that you are in precisely because you want to preserve your own status?
Absolutely not. So,
well, it sounds like it. How can you be against Europe, fundamentally against it, fundamentally in favour of getting out of it, and yet you don't want to go because it's too risky. Risky to your own position.
Well, you're trying to put words in my mouth. I've never said...
I've got it here from the Daily Mail. You wrote the article, the Mail on Sunday.
No,
you wrote the article.
Well, let me explain what my position is, because it's quite clear. And I agree totally with the focus that the Prime Minister has on this.
But you don't deny you don't want to be in Europe. You don't deny you never wanted to join it, and you'd like to get out, but it's too risky. That is precisely what you said in the Mail on Sunday.
My view is that the best course for this country in terms of jobs and growth is to remain. And the reason is
You're a Boris Johnson in reverse. Yes, you are. You're a Boris Johnson in reverse. Boris Johnson was a wishy-washy one way or the other. You're a rather more fundamentalist wishy-washy in the sense that you're adamant that you hate Europe. You don't want to be in it. You never wanted to join it, and yet you want to stay in it.
If I can explain my position, why I believe that it's best for business, jobs and growth to remain, and it's simple. I've spent 20 years in business before I came into politics, and I'm not going to ignore that experience. I've spent time now in government. I've been lucky enough to be both in the Treasury and now, of course, as Business Secretary. And one thing that is clear to me is that uncertainty is the enemy of jobs and growth.
Right.
And that's very clear to me.
OK.
And if you want to avoid that kind of uncertainty, if you don't want to deter investment, whether it's domestic or foreign investment,
you stay where we are.
Then it's best to remain. That doesn't mean to say everything is perfect, but we keep working, keep reforming the EU, but it's best to stay.
One final question. Last week, the Supreme Court ruled that the Deutsche Bank had evaded taxes by paying some of its senior employers and others through a Cayman Island entity which avoided British tax. You were a manager at Deutsche Bank. Can you be certain that you had no hand ever in evading British taxes whilst you were at Deutsche Bank? And did you evade them yourself?
I've never evaded taxes, and I never would. But
what about being in a system? Did you understand that the system was evading British taxes?
No, what I've said,
the Supreme Court says
what I've said on this, and I'm happy to repeat it because there's nothing to hide, is that I've never benefited from such scheme.
No, I asked you, though, did you know it was going on?
And
were you part of it going on? Not that you were benefiting, but you were in a process that was evading taxes.
So I wouldn't know the details of that scheme. It's not the kind of scheme I would spend time creating or putting together or marketing. And any details of the scheme, you'd have to ask the creators of that scheme.
But you had nothing to do with it?
But if you're asking me, did I benefit from the scheme? I did not benefit from that scheme.
And you knew nothing about it?
I'm saying
yes or no? Did you know anything about it?
I did. Everyone at Deutsche Bank knew about all the schemes that are offered to all employees at that time. And I was an employee at that time, but I didn't benefit from the scheme.
Sajid Javid, thank you very much indeed for coming in.